Where do you stand on the use of public funds to support vouchers or similar programs for private schools? Mr. Lee.
We can keep this brief. I'm against it. So I believe in the power of public education to accomplish great things in this state, and the amounts that they're proposing giving to students in the form of vouchers to attend private schools are less than the actual tuition of the private school. In fact, in other states where they've tried this, it turns out that it's just a discount for people whose children are already attending private schools to pay less for that private school, and has no actual impact on the outcomes of the students that are already in public education. So because public schools are held to higher standards, because we expect a lot of those public schools, because our school board members are elected officials, I do not approve of removing monies from public education and giving them to private schools. Full stop.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you. Pretty simple answer for me. I will not support any legislation that weakens public education and the opportunities it offers our Texas school students. So that's how I feel about that. Thank you.
Representative Leon.
I spent a lot of time working on procurements and contracts, and for me, the single most important thing we do is make sure that we manage taxpayer dollars, that we keep oversight of it, and that those taxpayer dollars go into the abyss of waste, fraud, and abuse. So for me, that's the most critical thing, no matter what that contract is. And so I haven't yet seen in the legislature any bill that provides the same sort of, any voucher bill, that provides that same sort of accountability that public schools have to have for their dollars that a voucher bill would have.
Mr. Gill.
So going back to my previous comment about cookie cutter solutions, there's a bunch of different avenues in which we can educate children, but it really needs to be a community decision. And I do believe that when we are talking about taxpayer funds, that there's a huge fiduciary responsibility on the legislature, on the state, to make sure that those funds are being managed properly. So I agree with the representative there that we have to make sure that if we cannot just give taxpayer funds to private entities and there be no accountability for that. There needs to be the same as or more than accountability than there are for public schools, because there needs to be oversight, because that's not a private person's money, that's the public money.
Thank you, Ms. Edmondson.
I'm opposed to vouchers. Now, charter schools may make sense in certain instances, but they need to meet the same standards as our public schools, which includes certified teachers, having to pass bonds for buildings they may need, employee contracts, and making sure that medical professionals are on every campus. Charter schools need to be accountable to local school boards, and they need to have to use the same funding formulas as our public schools do for money. Texas needs to be very careful in what it does in the future to not be creating a second shadow set of schools that end up being funded by tax dollars that are taken away from our public schools.
Thank you.
I'm also opposed to vouchers or any similarly or creatively titled alternative to drain funds away from our public schools and push them to another program. And we've talked earlier this evening about the challenge we already have with providing adequate funding. Until House Bill 3 in the last session, the state was only providing 38% of the funds for public education. They were on target to go down to 34%. Now, HB 3 means we're up to 45%, and that still is below. The state should be providing more than 50% of the funding. And yet they're going to take and drain off more of those resources and put it into a voucher or a scholarship program. I'll leave the charter discussion for another question, but I am wholly opposed to voucher programs.